What ended up happening is we ended up with a year of excuse making. And it wasn't to say that we didn't get anything done, but it just wasn't realistic to set such specific goals because other things naturally would come up that would take priority. See, we ended up with performance appraisal plans that said this changed, that changed, everything changed, this was delayed, this was postponed, and it really didn't make anyone feel like they got a lot done. They felt very frustrated during the year because they weren't getting such and such accomplished, and they were so worried that I didn't know that they weren't doing that because they were doing this. That it wasn't the best environment to be in. So last year, and I don't know if this will work because I'm still in the middle of the cycle, but last year I just said, look, what do I want to see in a year? If sitting at my desk, what do I want to say we're now doing? So I came up with this little vision statement for our area, and I said, I envision a year from now I can say this, this, this about my area. We're doing this, we're doing that, and we're doing this, we finished this, and we're...
Let me stop you. Just be a little more specific. What are we talking about?
Okay, we have tackled all major impediments to our investment policy, meaning we have to operate under different restrictions, and we've eliminated all the restrictions where we legally could that just simply didn't make sense. Now that could translate into 100 different projects, but my vision was just this basic feeling of well-being, that I wasn't having to deal with any of that crap anymore. And I thought, wouldn't that be wonderful to sit here a year from now and be able to say that? So that was one point. And I went on through a number of other things. I don't have to worry about cross-training because everyone in my area knows all the functions of cash flow, and now they know most of them, but there are a few little things missing. So one extra goal was to say, no, that's soup to nuts, that's handled right now. I don't ever have to worry about anyone not understanding a systems application because everyone's been trained in Lotus, Focus, this, that, and the other thing, so we're much more system literate, so to speak. And by just talking in this general way and then writing it down in terms of a vision, the world according to Karen, so to speak, we sat down and talked about it. And people were a little taken aback at first that we're doing it differently this year. You know, I had come up with this long list of things I was going to do. And I said, well, they'll probably fit in because we're not going to be far apart, but let's start from here. This is what's going to make me just happy as a clam a year from now. Now let's figure out what does it translate to, and let's not get too general. Let's not get dates attached to it. Let's just say that in a year I have to be this happy. And these are the kinds of things that are going to make me very, very happy. And we translate it into individual goals for people. Now, there's a lot less excuse making. There's still a little bit of that, yeah, that's in process, and oh, it's in the law department. That's a very popular answer. But we're better. And next year I hope we'll even be better. I'm sure I'll make some revisions to the way we go about this. So we're definitely not perfect, but we're getting to the point where people really do have a handle on why what they do ties into everybody else. So the buy-in just is a natural thing. I don't think we had to plan for that. That was just inherent in the process because they were all involved in tackling this vision statement and translating it to what it meant for them. And there's certainly personal satisfaction in just being able to accomplish something that's more manageable and more easy to understand and grapple with. But we'll know, maybe you should ask me this in 2 months. Maybe you should ask them.
Yeah. That was funny. We're not, Joan didn't suggest that I interview any people that get evaluated, although we all get evaluated. Well, that's good. That's interesting. There's a kernel of a question, I'm trying to think of how to express it, that process that you've just been talking about, impact the performance management process.
What do you mean how it impacts it, just in terms of mechanics, or?
I guess what I'm seeing is, you know, you've really restructured how your organization is going to deal with goals and what they mean, and that should have an impact on performance and your evaluation of performance. I mean, I haven't, there's an answer in the back of my mind, but I don't know.
Well, are you asking whether people have done better, improved their level of performance? I guess if there's anything that I would say it impacted that process by not having that process be separate from day-to-day work. I mean, that's the only thing that comes to mind. Before, it was like you did your job every day, and then all of a sudden that day would come, you know, about late August, September, when you do the other thing. And it's not that anymore. It's still a little bit of that. I don't think it'll ever go away completely. But this is how we do our job. We set goals and then we accomplish them. So it's not like a separate thing that we don't have time to do or gets put on the back burner. So there's no excuse that it's not getting handled, it's not getting administered. It's this uncomfortable thing that you also have to do because you might get fired otherwise. And I think it makes it more comfortable for everybody. So I guess what I'm saying is it integrates the thing to our normal daily existence. We're less, in the old days we used to do the official development discussion in the spring and the official performance appraisal in the fall. And I think even though we officially do write something down at those 2 points in time, we meet more often than that, at least quarterly, and in practice on a one-on-one basis, probably weekly or monthly, just depending on what's going on. So there's a constant updating of, I'm here on this, and just so you know, I'm here on this, and oh, we've got to rethink that completely because we just heard this, and that's going to shift the way we handle this goal accomplishment. So it's very integrated with our daily life.
Yeah. And it sounds like that the goal setting and the goal accomplishment are really by far the most important thing attached to that process.
Right, and I think that sunk in after the fact. It wasn't like I suddenly decided or read some book that said I should do this and immediately understood why. It was sort of by doing it, and then once it started to work, I started to realize that, geez, you know, why didn't we do this 3 years ago? It would have made life a lot easier, and I wouldn't have had to pull the wool over people's eyes on this thing and surprise them with the other thing about how they were doing all along. It's just obvious if you include them up front as to, we've got to get from point A to B, and I'm counting on you to help me get there. It's going to work.
We got everything done. We haven't even looked at the questions yet. What did you fear about doing performance evaluation?
I'm not so sure it would go away. Certainly any kind of confrontation.
Let me start. I should have been doing this earlier. What, my voice isn't on the tape. Okay, so when you respond to a question, if you could put a little bit of the...
What, they can't just figure it out?
I was asking what could cause fear.
I would fear, the process would cause me to fear just the confrontation with people. When anything is very stiff and formal, there's a greater degree of discomfort between both parties, and certainly as much on the manager's side as on the subordinates. Having to sit down and explain officially that you're rated this for this. It's very different to say halfway through the year that, yeah, you're doing okay on that goal, or take some emphasis off this and go to the other. But when you actually have to sit down at year end and say, you meet standards on this, or you do not meet standards, or you're any of the higher levels, there's always tension because you're actually categorizing it then. So that part is still the part I guess I still would fear and always have. I still think that the process has helped that make it less so. But just the direct confrontation when you right down to the wire and you're saying this is your rating, and that's what I think. There's always some disagreement on that too. One year what I tried was I asked everyone to rate themselves before I rated them. Well, that was a mistake. I'll never do that again, but it was a fun experiment. Everyone thought they were much, much, much better than I came up with, and actually I did that in the days before we were really good at goal setting, so I think that had something to do with it. I think if I did it today, we'd be closer together, but I wouldn't do it again.
What do you do, what have you done, when somebody, I usually say vehemently, disagrees with your evaluation? What do you do when somebody just hauls off on you?
Well, I haven't had that situation arise very often. I had a situation in one year where the person and I were about 2 levels apart. I was below meeting standards and this person was above, and that person ended up on probation and is no longer with us. So that's what happens. No, I'm kidding. Actually, I have been very, very fortunate. I have a wonderful staff and we get along, and because we communicate pretty well with each other, there really aren't any surprises. So I think the process is what helped avoid that. Maybe even more than luck, I don't know. But you know what happens to the ones that I disagree with.
Go away. Nicely put. How about at the mid-cycle point, at the midpoint? What do you try to accomplish at that point?
At mid-cycle, at least at mid-cycle in the old days, we used to view that as a development discussion. And that was the point where you suddenly sat down and started thinking of how to develop that person, what training they might need, etc. And I know the official process changed after that, and we just inherently would have decided to change it because it didn't make sense halfway through the year to start thinking of how you develop people. It really has to be square one. So right now, it's probably less formal than ever, and it's certainly briefer than it's ever been. But it's just an update and nothing more than that. I don't consider the discussion from my perspective as any different than what I do standing in the hall talking to somebody every month or week or quarter, depending on what the person is doing. I think they take it more seriously than I do. I think they're looking for clues as to what's going to happen at the end, and I'm not inclined to give too many. In terms of an official rating, I try to be honest in terms of whether they're doing well or not, but I try not to be too specific in terms of what I'm going to end up giving them as a rating, because I just feel like you can't know that far along. I mean, I need the year to kind of digest all of that's been accomplished. But when asked specific questions, I do try to answer them. I like to keep it as informal as possible.
Something tricky. You check focus and everything. Understands what your expectations of them are, but just doesn't quite meet them. I'm going to change. This is doing a lot of noise.
Expectations, once the year is over, doesn't actually happen. Maybe on an individual goal it would happen, but as in the aggregate it has yet to happen. And part of it's because I think I have a good staff, but probably more so because the process works for us. Again, it avoids the surprises, so I don't usually end up in a situation where someone has really done a lot less than I expected. They know. I mean, there's peer pressure too, because the group works together fairly well. One person excelling sort of encourages the other people to do the same thing, so there's a lot rubbing off on one to the other. So I've never been in a situation where someone just failed me completely and I had to deal with them on that, except for the one person I mentioned earlier, one situation. But normally on a goal-by-goal basis, if a goal was not met, we just simply talk about why. I mean, maybe they just had so many other things come up and they had legitimate excuses for why they couldn't spend the time on it. Maybe they didn't get enough guidance from me, which probably is the answer most often than not, because I tend to let people just go on their own and free form their own ideas, and some people can react well to that and others need more guidance. I need more help in giving them that. Or maybe it's just something that they weren't that interested in doing and they never really got off the ground because the motivation wasn't there, and we try to reconfigure the goal for the next time. But it's not a major problem area. We operate in an area where we almost have to get everything done. We report our results on an annual basis to the Committee of Finance, so there's a very strong incentive for us to meet these goals, because they're going to translate directly into those results we report. And I'm not inclined to stand up there and say, you know, we didn't do that great this year, sorry. So the staff pretty much knows I don't like to do that.
Great. That's fun.
Are we all
So
done?
No. Just actually put in pause.
Certain things as well, and now that I'm sort of running both, it'll probably change my focus there. But because we're in an investment area of the company, we're reporting on all the activity we did, all the investments we made, how well we performed, who we did business with, how we measure our performance year to year, and we also report on a subsidiary, John Hancock Capital Corp., and how much money we borrowed, how cheaply we borrowed it, who we borrowed it for, and all kinds of wonderful things. So, I mean, I just try to jazz up the presentation each time, you know, with some newfangled slides, or, you know, something that'll just, you know.
If you were talking to a manager who is just starting to go through this process of having to do the meetings, what would be the most important thing you could tell them?
The most important thing I could tell them would be to, and I'm not a planner, so this is hard for me to come up with anything that would even smack of planning. But I would tell any new manager that the most important thing you can do is to think about this day one and to put some of your own time and thought into how you want this process to end up in a year, because you'll have to think about it then, and chances are you'll regret it then if you haven't devoted the time up front. And I don't mean a lot of time, I just mean in terms of you'll be rated in a year. What are you going to be rated on? Obviously you're not going to do it alone, so figure out your own goals, just in terms of what it's going to take to make you rated the way you want to be rated in a year, and then figure out how you can give as much of that away as possible to everyone else. And that's essentially the creation of the goal setting with your group. So it's not this other thing that's a new management thing to do, and yeah, they'll get to it. It's something you just have to immediately latch onto and use as a tool for yourself, and not as a administered process that you have to follow because it's for your own benefit. It just happens to be something that the company would also like you to do for obvious reasons.
Good. That's it.
Okay.
Very good.